this is Lauren Hollows, and today we are talking about the problem with third-party reports. Now, obviously, third-party reports are a very commonplace in our industry, but what I tend to find is that a lot of RTOs really don't understand how to use them, what they are, what the purpose of them is, and how to create them effectively so that they capture evidence in a valid form. So one of the resources that's really good for this is a video that was hosted by Andrew Shea with ASQA a couple of years ago. It was a discussion in and around assessment processes. And through that process, one of the things that they did talk about was third-party reports. And in particular, there's a really good quote here, which I wanted to read to you guys, which I think starts to explain one of the challenges with third-party reports. At audit, we often find that tools, the assessment tasks haven't been completed in full, and that the students have been deemed to be competent for all knowledge and skills. There's often an over-reliance on the use of third parties. The system that the RTO has designed doesn't provide both parties with the full and complete and clear set of instructions so that each party knows their roles and responsibilities. And evidence that's submitted by third parties is often not checked, properly validated for authenticity and for completeness. So I thought this was a really good one because I particularly like that part about like the full set of instructions. That's something that I see very commonly at audit. And also whether or not the evidence is then like actually properly checked. And certainly with a couple of RTOs in the last probably 5 years, especially like leading up to COVID, the RTOs that were shut down that had like massive third-party arrangements, this was definitely one of the issues. So like some of the things that had been brought up at that point was that, the third parties were coming up with their own assessment tools and they didn't, they hadn't been validated. The RTO wasn't actually checking. They were just kind of, like they were getting in a list of the units that had been approved and they were just processing it. Even when they were like people who were using third-party tools, they were literally like, there was just no instructions. It was just like a copy and paste of the performance criteria. So it was a poor assessment. You were giving it to somebody who didn't have their TAE. And then you were using that as if it was the same quality as getting an assessor observation. So that was like just some of the issues. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you through some of the tools that are available on the ASQA website that are useful tools and documents and guides for those of you that are wanting to use third-party assessments. And I want to preface this by saying that there are valid reasons for using third-party assessments. So, a couple of examples of this would be, I know that in certain food processing environments and in certain mining environments, there are some situations that are so high risk where assessment is being done on the workplace, but to actually like approve an assessor to be there, most workplaces won't actually allow for that. So in that particular case, what you need is somebody qualified who's actually observing them, to agree that they're doing that on site. So like blasting and things like that is a really good example of that. Obviously, you can't do that in simulation. What you need to actually do is run the full and proper scenarios, and that's got to be done with, under very, very strict conditions. Another example of this is when potentially like patient dignity is going to be an issue. So when we look at things like the health sector, health assistance, even some of the parts of individual support, anything in and around like, it can be like youth work and mental health work and counseling and things like this. Obviously, it's not appropriate. Like a lot of the units will say, well, you have to have worked with, 2 clients over a period of 3 months or something along those lines. In that particular case, you can't have an assessor observing, in the workplace over a 3-month period. So again, it's one of these issues where like the RTO may do a simulated observation beforehand, and then that's followed up with like a logbook and a third-party report, where, it's being confirmed by, staff who are on site, where, it is appropriate for them to be sitting in on the sessions and for them to be, working with the clients as well. But it wouldn't be appropriate to have somebody coming in from outside of the organization and sitting in on an observation where like, a mental health assessment was being undertaken and things like that. So you know, often in that sort of context, when there's a patient dignity sort of issue, that's definitely another area where, you know, it can become, it just makes a lot more sense to have third-party observations as the method that's being utilized. Okay, so that's kind of the situations where third-party does make sense. But as I said, there's a lot of really good resources available from ASQA, and I just want to touch on a couple of those today. Okay. All right, so this is the Guide to Assessment Tools. It's available from ASQA, and it obviously talks about a whole bunch of different things. It does very clearly say that this is all of the stuff that needs to be covered. So for people who are saying you only need to cover performance evidence and knowledge evidence, no, you need to cover it all. But it does specifically talk about third-party evidence, and it says third-party evidence can take many forms. An example could include a work report from a workplace supervisor. Now, interestingly enough, when you click into this, it actually takes you to the third-party agreements page. So I will actually email ASQA and confirm and see whether or not they believe that like using a third-party report and using a third-party agreement now constitutes a third-party arrangement. I wouldn't have thought so. It hasn't been the case historically, but it is very interesting that that's where it's linking to. The one that I thought that it would be linking to would be this page here, which is the guide to using other parties to collect assessment evidence, which is effectively what we're talking about when we're talking about the use of TRPs, third-party reports. So one of the things that it says very importantly is here, okay, assessment evidence, judgment about competence needs to be undertaken by a person who meets the specific requirements for an assessor in the SRTOs, okay, in the standards. So in some cases, an assessor cannot directly gather all of the evidence, and we've talked about when that is the case. In this case, it is categorized as supplementary evidence. So generally, we've got like direct evidence and indirect evidence. Direct evidence is an assessor observing a skill happening, or us collecting, having the student write out the answers to a question. That's all direct evidence. Indirect evidence is, for example, a student completes a report, and so we go, well, in order for them to have completed that report, we know that they have to have read the instructions, they have to have written, they have to have written it out, they have to be able to use technology. So that's like an indirect evidence of the student being able to do it. This is supplemental evidence, right? And generally, I recommend to people, you need to have either for every requirement, you have a direct or an indirect source of evidence, right? So if all you're relying on is supplemental evidence, it is a lot weaker when you come to actual audit. So it's important to kind of have, to really focus on direct and indirect evidence. It does say that there is no hierarchy of evidence, but it then goes on to clarify, however, it would be difficult to make the judgment of competence without some evidence being actively assessed or supervised by the assessor. So basically, what we're meaning here is there actually needs to be a direct interaction between an assessor and the student in order for it to be, good evidence. And I do believe that there are circumstances where you can do that online, but there needs to be an interaction between the assessor and the student in order to be able to make that determination of competency in the vast majority of cases. Okay, so that's what it talks about. It then talks about some of the situations, and they've come up with the same ones that I have, which is compromising workplace safety or compromising patient confidentiality. Now, a point on that would just be to say, if you are utilizing third parties because it's too expensive to send your trainers out there, and that's literally the only reason that you can come up with, like they're down the road, the workplace has no problems with you coming there, and not once during the qualification do you come there because it's just not financially viable. You are standing on weaker territory, just in general. You know, I mean, I think there are some circumstances where you're working with a national provider. They've got, you know, 70 locations all over the country, and it's all ones and twos. You know, you need to work out a strategy beforehand that's gonna work with that. You can potentially do a lot with like face-to-face Zoom sessions and things like that. Again, depending on the qualification, if the workplace agrees to allow you to upload videos and things like that from the workplace. But you really do need to think about your reasons as to why you're making that decision. Okay. So when we're using evidence by third parties, we need to ensure a couple of things. So one, you need to have like a solid assessment. You need to make sure you're gathering as much of the evidence directly and indirectly as possible. And the third party report is generally it's a supplement for that. So it's kind of going, well, we've observed them doing this in simulation. They are competent performing it in simulation. We're utilizing a third party report to confirm that it's being done consistently in the workplace, and that it's being done to standard, or that it's being done a certain quantity of times with a certain quantity of people, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so you want to provide really clear information about that, and you have to provide really clear information to the third party that's actually collecting it. Okay, and then the other thing that you've got to do is you have to actually make sure that when the people that are signing off the third parties are actually signing them off, you know, that they are actually qualified to be able to do that. So you can't just say like any old supervisor. If the supervisor holds no qualifications relevant to what they're signing off on, then they're not appropriate as a supervisor. So I guess the three rules that we would put around this is one, choose your circumstances for using third-party reports carefully. Two, ensure that you've got as much direct and indirect evidence prior to implementing the third-party report as possible. And four, put some really clear parameters around the use of the third-party reports in relationship to who can use them, and providing lots of support on how it's being used. So we're going to get into that in another video. But for now, guys, if you are using third-party assessments, strongly recommend to have a read of the guide to assessment tools, and strongly recommend that you check out the ASCL resource, guides using other parties to collect assessment evidence. Make sure that, you know, like your process and your actual tools have, you know, are aligning to all of that. And if they're not, you know, make some updates, document it in your continuous improvement register, and keep moving forward from there. I hope you guys have found this helpful. I'm interested to know your guys' thoughts on third-party reports. If you've got any questions, as always, drop them below. Videos dropping every Wednesday and Sunday. If you do find this content valuable and you do want to support us at Anawire, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications button, make a comment below. All of that helps us to continue to provide you with this great content. Otherwise, guys, I am Lauren Hollows for NOI Education Services. I hope you have a great day. Bye.